We're in the TechCrunch studio today with David Merrill, who's president and co-founder of Sifteo. David, welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me.
So we met many, many years ago, and you guys are working in your factory in Dogpatch area, San Francisco, trying to build these siftables, these little computerized tiles, right? And so tell us a little bit about, I guess you brought some here today. Tell us what they are.
Right. Well, Sifteo cubes, as we call them now, they're a tactile game system. So video games meets classic games, basically. And the inspiration for that was just that tactile, like classic tabletop games, have such a long human history.
Yeah.
They're part of what it means to be a person since there have been people. Like tabletop games like checkers and chess and board games. Video games came along and they're awesome because they're so immersive and they kind of blur reality. But we thought, well, maybe there's something that fuses these two play patterns into one experience. So that's basically what Sifteo cubes are, is a tactile system of these little wireless screens that are physical, that are aware of each other and how they're being moved around, and you can write software and games to take place on them.
Got it. So what I think is really interesting, and we're going to show folks a demo, first demo on this show, which I think it's awesome when people see it. Walk us through a little bit about how you and Jeevan, your co-founder, right, back in 2007 started working on this problem. I mean, just briefly walk us through the history, right? Because people are talking about hardware today and Internet of Things, and 2012 is coming to a close. But you guys have been noodling on this problem for years. Right,
and we are part of a tradition of noodling on this problem for much longer. The research world has been looking at ubiquitous computing, Internet of Things for 20 years or more.
Okay.
And so Jeevan and I, we've known each other for a long time, for probably 15 years.
Okay.
We were undergrads together. We were in a rock band together. So one lesson learned, it really helps to know your co-founder extremely well. Yeah. So we've been friends forever. And we found ourselves at the MIT Media Lab as graduate students, and we're just kind of thinking about interfaces and physical interfaces in particular, like things that did not look like a screen or a mouse or a keyboard. And so we started to think about how we use our hands. And you're surrounded by Legos at the Media Lab because they've been a sponsor for a long time. So we were in the kitchen this one day and thought, what would it be like if you could interact with a computer in a way that was like jamming your hands into a big pile of Legos? Right? Like, just think about what that feels like when you jam your hands into Legos and you start pushing them around, and your fingers, all 10 fingers are involved, and so easy to like grab one and pick it up and move it around.
Right.
And at the time, especially, this was before multi-touch had really arrived on the scene as a consumer interface, we thought, the mouse and keyboard is so limiting. There's got to be a better way. I've got all these things on my computer, like icons and digital pictures and emails, all these collections of little digital items. Wouldn't it be great to give each one a physical embodiment on my desk, so I could just reach in like that pile of Legos and push them around, as a way to interact with digital stuff. So that was the kind of fundamental inspiration, was like, our bodies are great at doing stuff that computers aren't really taking advantage of yet.
And so when you guys started working on it, what were the initial technical problems that either you sought out to look at, or the technologies off the shelf that you were saying, hey, this is going to be important to what we're trying to do?
Well, just getting it to work at the beginning was the hard part. And fortunately, when we started doing this, the DIY resurgence had already started to happen. So there were online places where you could buy parts for prototyping. And so we started buying screens and microcontrollers and sending out our own circuit boards, and we basically had to become like self-taught electrical engineers to put these prototypes together.
You put that pretty casually, self-taught electrical engineers. Don't do this at home.
You can do this at home, though. It is possible. It's not rocket science. So we started to build prototypes based around this idea. Each one worked a little better than the last, and as we built, we started to show these to people and try different applications like digital image editing and music sequencing, and we found that although we initially imagined them as kind of a productivity tool, people thought they were great for play. They saw them and they were like, oh, this looks like alphabet blocks if they were invented in the 21st century. So we started to get this idea that maybe play was the best thing that we could build, at least in the first instantiation of this new physical user interface.
I see. Okay. And then so for 2 years, you and Jeevan are building the technologies and noodling on these sort of building blocks. And then you have this TED Talk, right, in 2009, which is, I think, one of the 2 or 3 TED Talks I've actually seen the whole thing through. How did that change what you guys were doing?
Well, I would say that was like our Kickstarter moment, even though there was no Kickstarter at that time. So that talk got way more popular than we imagined.
Yeah.
And gave us it made us realize that we really had something here, that this was worth pushing it forward and bringing it out of the lab and turning it into a product. Because in the lab, it was cool. It was a good research project. We've tried all these things on it, wrote some papers about it.
So you guys really had no clue like what the reaction was going to be, or?
We knew that when people saw it, they thought, "Oh, this is good. I like this. This is a neat thing." But it was, I mean, when that video went online, it was more than 1 million views really fast. So it was one of these videos that just got passed everywhere.
Right.
And that was the kind of market validation that we needed to then launch a company and start building it into a real product.
And then the hard part about hardware, right, comes in, right? Because I think when I initially met you guys, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and you were just starting to build these things, I remember thinking at that time, a lot of investors weren't, today people are talking about Internet of Things again, or a little more mainstream, and you can buy connected devices at the store, things like that. People, I would imagine you had a hard time pitching people for venture investment in some cases.
Yeah, it was really varied. We did have some pretty tough pitches that didn't go so well.
What do you think some of the fear was around, let's say a few years ago, around a hardware startup?
Well, I think there's this idea that it's more expensive to start a hardware company. To some degree, it is. I mean, you have to buy more stuff because you're buying, electronic components. You're making circuit boards. You're actually fabricating things. So there is some cost, but in reality, that doesn't end up being the most expensive part long term. At least in the startup
still
phase.
Comes down to
it's still people. Like how many, payroll is our biggest expense.
So you feel like there was almost an irrational fear about fixed costs and how those would rise?
Yeah, yes. And also, I think there's just not a lot of experience in the VC community investing in hardware. And so we found a couple of investors, True Ventures and Foundry Group, that were more enlightened or willing to take a risk or had a little experience already investing in hardware startups. And so they were willing to do it. And one of the takeaways for us was it's way more effective to find an investor who already believes in the vision that you're trying to push than to try to convince somebody who doesn't.
Oh, sure.
It's almost impossible the other way.
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
I would totally agree. And so there's also must be a fear of an investor, even in later stages too, about like, well, how's the market going to respond, right? Because you don't know, like if you're creating, let's say, networking hardware, right, for businesses, there's already sort of a set model, and you need a lot more money to build those things, and there's less competition, right? Here you're competing with, Apple devices, gaming consoles, right, offline board games, right? How do you? Is that something you think about, or is that something that came up in your discussions?
Well, let's see. How do I answer that? I think that any consumer-facing startup has some of the same challenges, which is, are people going to like what we're making? Are they going to use it? Are they going to buy it? If it's something people buy, so I think those are not unique to hardware startups. The things that are unique. And incumbents also, like software startups, app startups have that too. But the things that are unique are the distribution is really different for hardware startups. You need to understand retail.
Right.
What does it mean to get a product on the shelf at Best Buy or Barnes and Noble?
So walk us through, like, now that you're thinking about it, because you're going to launch. Now, can you show people like what you guys are launching and what they could buy?
Sure. Yeah. So this is. Our second-gen Sifteo cubes, and so we launched the first-generation version of this platform about a year ago.
Okay.
And
Sifteo cubes.
The cubes themselves were fairly similar in terms of like basic functionality.
Okay.
Color screen, accelerometer, wireless communication, and these neighbor sensors, which let them detect each other when they get next to each other.
So if a person buys a larger sort of starter unit, they get the base plus 3 of these?
Plus 3 cubes,
okay.
But they can also buy more cubes one at a time.
Sure.
So this is the add-on cube. It'll do up to 12, actually, with our new system.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we launched the first gen about a year ago, and the play experience was great. Like, people really liked it when they played it, but they had to use their computer to play it. And we realized that was just a little too much friction from having the idea, I want to play Sifteo cubes, to actually being in the play experience.
Right. It's like
too many steps.
It's like the hassle of doing iTunes, right? You have syncing it to iTunes and downloading all the music. Similar problem?
Kind of. It was just like, yeah, I mean, it was more than that, actually. It was just that you had to use your computer to play. The computer actually ran the games.
I see.
So you needed to be near your laptop, which made it not that convenient to take it out in the world and go mobile.
And so you were telling me now, when a consumer buys this, which you know, it'll be available now,
right?
That it comes preloaded with 4 games?
Yeah, there's 4 games and a demo for a 5th game.
Okay.
And it has a coupon inside for a full download of that 5th game.
Okay.
So it's basically 5 games that people get as part of the purchase price.
Okay.
And that's our launch suite of titles.
Got it.
And it's totally self-contained now, so you don't need your computer to be there. Batteries are included, so you could literally buy this in an airport and then start using it right away, bust it out, and within 5 minutes, you know, or less, somebody would be playing already.
Got it. Okay. And let's talk a little, I want to discuss 2 things. One, just the offline retail and distribution, and, well, I guess including online. And 2, you know, what's your plan for having more game developers on here, right? Because that's a whole nother challenge. In addition to into building the hardware, you have to also build a platform into the software so other game developers, right, can create siftable games.
Right.
So let's talk about that first. What was that like in terms of saying, okay, we want to showcase our initial product with some games, but we're not a game studio, right?
Right. Well, we have a game studio, so we actually are. We're both a platform maker and a game studio.
Huh.
So in a way, you might think of us as a little Nintendo, you know, making the kind of new platform with unique affordances for interaction. Plus, we know that, you know, a platform without great games on it doesn't get adopted. So we knew that we had to both provide this initial suite of games that are awesome, but then also keep putting good games on the system over time to grow it from the inside.
And is your feeling is that if the market reacts positively to this and more people buy it, then more developers will see that as an opportunity and sort of rush to your studio?
Right. So we also have a SDK that's a free download.
Okay.
So we knew it needed to be a platform from the beginning that people outside the company could use.
Yeah.
So that's been part of the plan, and we've engineered that along the way.
Right.
So we released that, actually, the SDK, before we released the product, because we wanted to let people get started on it.
Okay.
So it's a really good SDK. It's like C++. It has a full emulator that like actually emulates the hardware of the cubes cycle for cycle.
Great.
So it's like people can write software in our
see
system.
it actually render.
Yeah, it'll just run on the hardware. So we knew that was important, so that because we don't have the market cornered on creativity for a platform like this.
Sure.
We knew that like getting it out there, people would surprise us and make stuff that was awesome that we never even imagined.
And so for the hardware geeks out there, can you tell us like what sensors you built into here? I mean, obviously there's a touch component. It'll understand the tilt. And in terms of putting them together, there's some connectivity. Can you talk about the different technologies you put in?
Yeah, we could do a whole show for the hardware geeks, but I'll
sure.
try to keep it contained.
Right.
So each of these cubes has a little 2.4 gigahertz radio that lets it communicate with the base here.
Okay.
This is like the brain that runs the games and has a speaker.
Okay.
It's got a color screen that's 128 by 128 pixels, a single touch panel on top, so it's capacitive touch, but it's not an XY. It's like you touch it anywhere, and it's like a single binary touch.
Okay.
And then 3-axis accelerometer, so like a Wii controller.
Yep.
It can sense shaking, tilting, other gestures, being flipped upside down, stuff like that. And then the neighbor sensing is on each of the 4 sides, we've got a circuit of our own design that can sense the near proximity of another cube. So like if I put this next to this one, you know, when they get a couple millimeters away from each other, they sense that. And to the game application running, it knows, okay, 2 cubes now got put next to each other. I know which cubes they are, and I know which side of those cubes got placed adjacent to each other. So it backs out the topology as you make different arrangements on the table of these cubes. And that's the most characteristic Sifteonic gesture of the system is
nice.
like this arranging the cubes and then neighboring them next to each other.
Okay.
It's something that's really unique to this platform.
Okay. And so switching gears a little bit, now when you're about ready to go to market and it's holiday season, which I'm sure was like a crazy rush for you to get everything set.
It's the deadline for any consumer electronics company, like getting it out there for the holidays.
Sure. So how do you, I mean, that's got to be way outside your guys' comfort zone, right? I mean, you guys are building hardware, building software, have a game studio. How have you guys thought about distribution? I mean, obviously there's an online component, and then people are buying a lot of gifts offline. Like, how do you think that through? How do you build up a strategy to do that?
Right. Well, the baseline is we have our own website is a store, so people can buy it there. Yeah. But one thing we learned really quickly by talking to other founders of hardware, connected hardware companies, was that people don't trust your website the way they trust Amazon, for instance. So we knew from pretty early on that we needed our retail and e-tail presence to be bigger than just the Sifteo website. Right. And so even with our first-gen system, and now with our next-gen system that's launching now, basically, we've had it in Amazon, and that's just a huge channel. That's like, you know, over time, who knows, that may be the biggest channel. But we also think that for our system in particular, because the physicality of it is really important, for people to see it in retail, there's some power there. Yes. And so we really do want to have it in retail. So it'll be in Barnes & Noble this holiday season too. Oh, great. So people will be able to walk in, see it, test it, try it out, potentially look at a video of it. You know, that's some of the things that hardware startups think about, is like, given that I'm making a thing, how do I let people experience that thing before they decide if they're going to buy it or not? Sure. And that can be expensive too. So one of the things that, you know, we talk to a lot of other founders, like I said, of hardware companies, and learn, well, how are you dealing with demos in store, and like, how much are they charging you? So like, you had to learn that all in addition to building this. Yeah, but the cool thing is that there's starting to be this community of hardware startups, and people are sharing information with each other. I think maybe because it's still kind of a new thing, the community feels small enough that people are still hanging out and swapping war stories. And so, you know, you can find out the kinds of things you need to know about how do you go to retail, who's the right buyer to talk to here or there, and how much do they charge you, and what are they going to do for you, given that they're charging you that, and all these kind of details that you might not know just coming at it from, you know, being a software developer or computer science person. I guess the last question would be is like, okay, if there's somebody out there who's thinking about doing some sort of hardware connected startup or just starting out on that process, and actually I've actually met some companies that are pivoting into this, what's like the single piece of advice you would give them, right? You've been working on this now for 5 years to get to this point. What kind of advice would you give them? Gosh, single piece. If you had to boil it down to one thing. I would say know that it's going to be a struggle that's different than starting a software company, but also know that you should reach out to other hardware entrepreneurs that are further along than you are, and they will be willing to help you navigate the path. You know, Jeevan and I have talked to a ton of people in the Bay Area who have gone down this path before, and once you start realizing that you're part of the community and talking to people in the community, you just get connected to other people who have done stuff. And so that's probably the most valuable thing I can say, is like, go to the meetups. You know, there's a San Francisco hardware startup meetup that's been meeting for about 6 months or 9 months. Lemnos Labs or something? Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's other places. There are accelerators like Lemnos Labs. Out in Boston, there's Bolt. Out in Shenzhen, there's Hackcelerator. Like, there's starting to be these support networks to help people do this. You know, alternative funding models. If VCs give you the cold shoulder, check out Kickstarter. So I think there are all these factors that are converging now that make it a lot more possible to do a hardware startup and make it grow than there would have been 5 or 10 years ago. Got it. Well, congratulations again, and we'll, you know, for showing the demo, and good luck to you guys. Thanks very much. Happy to be here.